Hello and welcome to Any Means Necessary, the information design podcast where we explore past and present design problems by any means necessary. My name is Shadi Swaydan, and today I'm joined by my fellow classmates.
Hi, I'm April.
Hi, I'm Asa.
Hi, I'm Kaitlyn.
Hi, Kirk here.
Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, it's Wyatt.
Today, we'll be discussing all problems, experiences, and tips relating to web design and development, including the decision to work as a designer or front-end and back-end developer. Before we begin, we'd like to remind everyone listening that we are in no way experts on the topics being discussed, but rather speak on our personal and collective experiences in the information design program at Mount Royal University and beyond. With that being said, I will pass the mic over to Kaitlyn, who will get us started with web development.
Hi, I'm Kaitlyn, a fourth-year information design student. I currently work as an in-house web designer, and I do a little bit of freelance web development when I have the time. Today, we're going to be discussing the designer-developer relationship, how to make that work together a little bit easier, professional, and have things run a little smoother. We're also going to be talking about the differences in working as a designer versus a front-end or back-end developer. So let's start with the designer-developer relationship. There can easily be miscommunication between the designer and the developer. Things can be interpreted differently, and terminology might not be consistent depending on that person's area of education. I know there's like the classic cliche of developers and designers not really getting along. And I think that basically just revolves around communication and understanding the languages of each person.
Yeah, I can attest to that for sure. I guess it was more or less like you. I would do a lot of the design work, or prefer to do it, right? So I have a little bit of a background doing coding, tagging, whatever, some JavaScript copy paste code. I think we mentioned that in an episode earlier. And I kind of know the lingo, I guess is a good way to put it. And it's still a complicated relationship to maintain on a big project, things like that. Now, my experience kind of cuts off. Like, it was usually myself and another guy that knows how to do the back end code and stuff like that. And I guess by saying that, I've never really worked on a big team. Is that what you're up to, Kaitlyn?
It's not a huge team. I'm the designer, and I work with, there's probably like 2 other developers that I've been working with, or just like it's a website redesign. So I designed the navigation and the header, and we've just been going back and forth. There was an issue with some of the files I was sending. I didn't realize that they didn't know how to use Illustrator. And I had this assumption in my head that I could just send them the file and they'd be able to turn the layers on and off and see what I needed to show them, but they didn't know how to use Illustrator. So I think I could have just saved a lot of time there if I just sent them like a file that they could have worked with from the get-go.
Yeah, I think there's like a big disconnect or miscommunication between developers and designers, where it's like expectations on what programs and everything that can be handled, and just like the jargon associated with one discipline towards the other, right?
Yeah, and I think I think it's just an art. For example, it's easy to assume that developers have like all the tools of the trade and all that sort of stuff, like we do, right? Like, I don't know how to explain this better than saying, like, if you buy a computer, say maybe your parents or something like that, they just buy a brand new laptop and they expect Word to be on the system, and they're like, how come I can't type a resume or an Office document on this thing? So when it comes to us, how do I put it? Like, our Adobe software, our creative software, our creative tools become synonymous with like a laptop or a computing device in some sense. And that's really looking too deep into it, but it's funny because we get kind of so used to having those applications. It's just better to assume that the developer doesn't have these. They usually have compilers or whatever. They certainly have Google Chrome installed and things like that when they're doing that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's it was a fair assumption, I'd say, Kaitlyn. But I think, yeah, as designers, we're solely responsible for providing all visual assets, and it could be overwhelming, I suppose, at times.
One of the issues I also faced when I was working at the marketing department was when we were wanting to do certain updates on the website, and even though it's just like WordPress, it was nothing complex like HTML, CSS. The communication aspect is so important in terms of the language that you use, because like I remember one of the biggest issues we had was she kept saying like, oh, can you just shift it down like, you know, a little bit more? And then it's like, oh, why can't we condense this here? And you know, it's just very vague and very not precise language. And I remember there's so much back and forth to the point that my boss came up to me and was like, do you know anything about HTML and CSS or like web design? Can you help us with the communication? So I had to go there and I had to see. I was like, oh no, you know, you only can do this and then do that depending on the plugins they're using, because this is WordPress. This is not like a pure HTML, CSS. You know, there's not as much customizable, you know, parts that you can do. You know, and then so yeah, I think the precision in language in telling the web designer like what to do is also like a big aspect I find for the developers at the back. And if you're coding, like especially if you're doing using JavaScript and like HTML and CSS, you have to be even more precise, because that is a whole different world in terms of language use, I feel, anyways.
Yeah, totally. And in Milena, in her designing for interactivity course this last semester, provided a really good resource about working with developers that we can link in the description. And it basically said, yeah, understand each other's processes and training and just be super specific so that the developers know what you're talking about. So if you need, say, like an image below text or above text, specify the amount. Sorry, my cat. Specify the amount of space that you need between those elements in a language that they're going to understand. Say like 100 pixels, you know, or you know, X amount of padding, so that they can execute that the way that you envision it. Because they don't have the training to think like we do necessarily. They might not understand design that we like how we do. You can't really take that for granted, I guess.
Yeah, I think that like it's a matter of like understanding limitations and stuff, and like designers needing to know like what can be done, and like you're kind of talking about, just like being transparent with each other and dumbing things down a lot. It may sound like rude or kind of redundant, but just to like kind of break everything down into its parts and really detail parts of that project that need to get completed in a certain way, and to make sure that they can be done in that way too. That'd be a huge part of any project, right?
Yeah, and I don't even think it's necessarily redundant, because those obvious like design decisions that we make are not necessarily obvious to a non-designer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it's kind of ironic too, because like the dispute between designers and developers kind of traces back to the dispute we face as information designers, which is sort of translating using like relatable terms and language. But it's just more on an internal platform. So I guess in that sense, it's just like not being marketed to the world. But yeah, you still have to pay so much attention to it.
I'm surprised that you have to go through that amount of depth. I mean, I guess we can always kind of pick on the logo placement and things like that, you know. And I just think of the scenario where you have the logo to place up in the top, whatever, top left corner of a website or something like that. And to have to go to that great a detail to go pixel push it to this and to that, I find that very interesting. I usually left that up to the developer in some cases. But again, I guess it's just a different experience, because again, I had a lot of flexibility, and I could usually go in there and do the pixel pushing myself, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to those, it would just be for like the deal breakers, the things that like, you know, that this needs to be a certain way or else it's going to look bad. Like another example for communicating something specific would be like, it needs to be a sans serif font. So like preferably, you know, Roboto, for example. But then you could be flexible and say, okay, if we can't have Roboto, let's use, you know, Helvetica. If that's not available, use Arial. So like you specify something specific that you need, and then you can still be flexible within that parameter.
That's interesting. I worked on another, I guess over my summer internship, we were working on a really massive site, and we contracted a lot of this stuff to a big company that was doing everything in the back end. And then, you know, they would present it to us, and then we would kind of, I guess as the customer in this case, kind of tell them where we wanted things and things like that. And I remember there was a high stress in my role at the time, because, well, I did get hired at my internship because of my experience and stuff like that. And they were really curious about my opinion as to layout and things like that. And what was really funny is that we weren't in control of the design. You know, so we were, again, a customer to the design and development is the best way to put it. And so we would kind of say, oh, you know, I wish the arrow did this and I wish the arrow did that. But yeah, it's funny. Even at that stage, they had me pixel pushing in some circumstances. And it was kind of fun in my role to say, because I would have a lot of one-on-one time personally with the developer, because I spoke their lingo. Now that, you know, we're talking about it, it's just kind of coming to mind. It's like, yeah, I think that was almost an extreme edge to have that one-on-one, and then we did get the final output that we were looking for. Well, in my circumstance, what my manager was looking for. So yeah, that's a really interesting relationship. So yeah, lingo is key.
I really don't have a lot of experience working with developers, but I definitely wish that, like, I'm just saying this, it doesn't really have much to do with anything, but I definitely wish I had more experience working with like different like coding languages and everything, and kind of knew more about it. But we definitely dabble with it in our program, but it's something that you kind of have to teach yourself, right? Well, for us anyway.
Another barrier that I kind of face was just, other than communication, is I realized as a designer, as much as like, you know, the especially if it's web design, you know, they should know design language to a certain extent. But like I realized that, you know, personally, I was not very well versed in web design language. So it's also like, that's definitely an issue that designers out there in general, be it information designers or just normal designers, should know that they need to do their homework in terms of knowing the language, just so that you can have it, you know, if you want to do a really good job, you know their language so that you can convey and communicate what you want in the most precise way. So you just can have, you know, just better efficiency and everything. Because I definitely did not know a lot of things. They're like, how many pixels? I was like, inches? So it's not a good thing. But yeah, that's definitely an issue that is to be noted.
And it's really interesting, Arthur. You know, like, again, I think about that communication chain and things like that. And again, you know, I'm having a lot of premonitions here. Is, you know, I've never really thought of it the other way around either. You know, they need to know my design lingo as much as I need to know their developer chit chat, so to speak, right? And you know, I wonder if maybe my experience lies is that I think I've gained the strength of being able to kind of maybe swing both ways on that dialogue, because it, you know, I perform both, if that makes sense. You know, like I basically, let's cut that. Shut up. Let's cut that.
Was awesome.
Okay, where was it? Good. Swing both ways.
Yeah, you sure do, bud.
So what? Anyway, I've done a lot of design work. Everyone knows I like to spend a lot of time on aesthetics and things like that, right? But I also kind of like to go behind the scenes there and really play with the code and learn that side of it as well. And I think through those actions, maybe just, yeah, enough time, I've learned the lingo on both sides.
Yeah, and it does prove important. I remember a little while back, Kirk and I had a little meeting with a developer. We're working on an app right now. Shout out to Connect YYC. Found us on Instagram there if you need. But we're having a little conversation. We had a big meeting. He was developing in the back end, and he's talking about all this code. And everything that was going on. And I remember me personally, I was sitting there just absolutely have no idea what is going on right now. Had no idea what the language was saying or what we were talking about. And Kirk the entire time was basically just kind of the mediator between both of us. And it kind of goes to prove the importance and how you can be productive in that communication, how you can actually get tasks done if you know both sides. So I do think it is important, as much as a designer it is to learn development side and vice versa, right? So.
And Kirk, because you have that experience on both ends, you likely understand the limitations of code. Because as designers, we've been taught to push things to Z and then bring it back, they say from A to Z. You push the design, make it wild, budget is whatever, you know what I mean, with all of our school projects.
Well, they're going through the same thing we're doing. Again, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about that triangle, right? The quality, the cost, and the time spent on it, right? And they're going through the same thing. And so there's such thing as bad code, and they're under the gun with rushes and stuff like that as well. The project timelines and things like that. And I'm maybe just going to roll the ball, in terms of what you guys think. Maybe it's understanding just the time it takes for someone to do something on the back end. Now, I don't know what it takes in terms of time to create a whole whatever Shopify link and all that sort of stuff, and then the code that talks to it in a big PHP whatever database system. I mean, I'm sounding crazy here now, but I don't, but I got an idea that it could take a few days or things like that. And so, what do you guys think? Maybe it's just a time thing, just knowing or appreciating the time that it takes for something to be performed on their end.
So, I actually work with, as I mentioned before in the previous episode, with a tech company, and a lot of the things we did, what the product they sold was to do with data storage, data organization, kind of like almost like a quote unquote better version of Microsoft project was what they were working on. And it was just very eye-opening to kind of like see and work side by side with the development team, because I was on the 8th floor and they were on the 7th floor, but I would frequently go down to work with them because I had to create tutorials for them, right? Like, how do you use this and all of that. But yeah, I would say like kind of like once you see what the developers do, the backend developers, or like be it the website people who design the website, and like really understanding, oh, if you want this extra like pop-up or like this overlay, even a simple overlay, I think there was like a bunch of developers like losing their minds over it because it was such a simple thing, but for some reason they could not get it to be placed accurately. And just seeing how like, a tweak of a simple code, sometimes it messed up with the other things and all that, depending on how you structure your website and using what kind of like program, it was very interesting, just understanding the back end stuff. It really gives you a better perspective as a designer. And in a way, you kind of like, make a bit more like when you do your designs also, it kind of like, to help them, you kind of like make sure you adjust yourself and don't give them kind of like ridiculous, I want fireworks to go on the moment you like enter the website and stuff like that, and they're like, no. So it's like, it really sets your expectations to be a bit more realistic and to adjust it accordingly, for sure, which would help both parties in the end.
I know when I worked on a few websites, I would have like maybe a design in mind for a page or something, and you quickly come to find that it might not work or things are going to change and really fast, and you kind of have to go with the flow on everything. Like, you can't really have a set design in mind because for the most part it's going to change because the coding sometimes won't allow you to do certain things. So
yeah, going back on the topic a little bit, Kirk, you introduced the idea of time and quality, and how much time it would actually take to kind of put in like a Shopify or a WordPress link in a sense. And Arthur, you're talking about the struggles with coding in general. So do you guys think that, now with the addition of WordPress, all these different kind of means to create websites, do you think that in a sense hinders the back-end development kind of course of action. I mean, obviously in certain things, like for example, we're talking about app development, you're always going to have back-end developers for that because there's not really a sort of thing like WordPress for that kind of material or medium. So do you guys think it kind of hinders the process in a way, or where do you think we're going with it in the future?
I think that maybe it hinders it a little bit. Like, are you talking about it imposing on like developing jobs?
Yeah, in a sense, also maybe a little bit of design too, because I mean, I've had my fair share of people come up to me and say, "Hey, can you make a website for me?" And obviously, I'm not the best coder, so I would go to something like WordPress, honestly. But they can also just do it themselves. It's not that hard to learn, right? So maybe people see it as a way of saving money, or different ways they can use it.
Yeah, I think from like a web designer, anyone can make their own website, but not everybody can make a good website. So I think that like that creativity and the process that goes behind web design is like there's always going to be a need for that. And I think same for development. Like I know sites like WordPress allow for some custom CSS and HTML and all that, but you got to know how to use it. And like their plug and play building block things there's limitations to what you can do with that. So I think that you're still going to need even the front end developers, and of course we'll always need the back end developers because apps don't build themselves.
Fear the web template. Oh,
yeah,
right. That's a classic, and
exactly.
I really appreciated that class with Milena where we got to play with WordPress, and maybe I'll just state it this way. Maybe we should kind of thank the sky that WordPress is difficult to operate a little bit in the back end, because it just kind of keeps us busy, if that makes sense. Because I know for sure a lot of that process on the scenes, like WordPress is powerful. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's great, and it gives you those templates where we could take it to the next level, right, and all that sort of stuff. And it's a fast route to that. But maybe it is again nice that it's a little bit of a jungle back there sometimes, right? So it's nice to again maybe link up with someone that knows how to develop the back end really well as well.
And I don't think developers' jobs, because Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, even though they exist, there's like really beautiful templates, but as Kaitlyn said before, like at the end of the day, everyone can create their own website, but whether it's a good website is another thing. And also, depending on what you want your website to do, and depending on the full extent, like if it was like, for example, a e-commerce website, like heavy e-commerce, and there's just so much like Amazon, or like even if it's like a apparel shop online, you cannot have a basic WordPress website. It needs way more than that. So I don't really think it's like how some people think that like designers or like certain other jobs are going to be taken over by these like pre-made stuff. It's never really gonna go away, because you always need someone who actually understands how it works, actually understand how to make it good and all that. So I don't think those jobs will go away, because there's always something.
Well, and I also think that's our edge as information designers. We're I mean, this has been my experience. Like, we go beyond design. I know I put a lot of time into my design. Maybe it just makes me feel better. I don't know, but I've learned that we can be great content creationists as well, right? And so, maybe the template will swallow up the designer's role in the interwebs or whatever else. Probably not soon, but maybe over the next decade, let's say, right? And when it comes to us as information designers, at least we have that fail-safe mechanism, or maybe it's even more safe than being a designer in terms of content creation, right? So someone has to put the words on the screen, and it has to make sense, and it has to be clear and concise, right? Amongst the other 5 C's, anyway.
I think with that being said, it's not so much of web developers' jobs are at danger because of all these pre-made templates. It's kind of like graphic designers, right? I mean, we're information designers, it's a bit different. But similar to us, if you think about it, I think their jobs won't disappear. I think it would just evolve. It would change. You know, what a web designer used to do, a backend developer used to do 10 years ago, will probably change 10 years later. You know, there's like other things that they would do. So I think there's always going to be a job. I think the job scope maybe might change. You know, the basic structure of it, how is it now, and maybe how is it 10 years later with the rise of, you know, all these like pre-made sites and all that. It'll probably change. So I think it'll still be around no matter what. But I think it'll just more of like everything's evolving, you know, just like information designers. The way we are built is so that we can adapt to the times. So they're probably going to adapt to the times eventually.
You know, and you know what's really interesting. You know, you know, I'm gonna obviously date myself or whatever, but I was there during the MySpace threat. You know, it's gonna destroy everyone's web job or whatever else, and the Wix comes out, and then Squarespace and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know. I've been having the same conversation with people, us kind of folks, designer folks, for 15 years now. And you know what? I don't know. I'm sure it's shifted a little bit. You know, like you said, the tools change or evolve and things like that, but you bring up a good point. You know, I've never really thought about this or considered it, but yeah, we're still we're still working and we're still having the same conversation I had 15 years ago. So that's, yeah, food for thought there. All right, so we have a big blank there. So what are we sitting at, man?
Should we move on to the next topic?
Yeah.
The second half?
Yeah.
Okay. I can do like a quick little wrap up of this so it's not just like a blunt topic change.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Just remember to count to 3 and then you can begin.
I think this episode's shaping up well. What do you guys think?
So far, so good. So yeah, with proper communication, setting expectations, and understanding each other's education and training, I think that the designer-developer relationship can certainly be a positive experience. So let's move on to talk about our second topic, working as a designer versus a developer, whether that is a front-end developer or a back-end developer. So our area of expertise would probably be in that designer category. What do you guys think?
Unless you're a Swiss Army knife like Kirk here.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and again, I know I choose to be more on the design side. Whatever, everyone's got a knack, right? And I always like to say that what you're good at is something that you enjoy, right? I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a proverb there or something, but you know, I just like the design front end sort of thing. You know, like again, my touch points with the back end is really the lingo. You know, talking to someone that really isn't an expert, and so you know, having that relationship and being positive. Of course, it's it should remain positive on a team. You know, again, tight deadlines and things like that can can ruffle that relationship once in a while. But you know, when everyone's kind of celebrating at the end and really congratulating each other on a fine piece, I like to see a mechanism that I just, that just dazzles me. It's like, how did you do that? How did you program that? And I'm not really looking for exactly how they did it with code or whatever, but, just, hey, I came up with this idea and it just flowed with your design. And what do you think? And I think having maybe that open space for ideas on both sides is a beautiful thing. You can come up with surprises. Again, I think throughout our entire information design career, what is it, be it 4 years, 5 years, or still kind of continuing, but I've been surprised often, on some of the things we've been learning. Like again, I'll talk about just sketch iterations, right? And I just I'm blown away how that's now part of my process and how effective it is to get to a better solution, creative solution, right? And so maybe we expand past that, where you have this whatever sandbox or something like that, where you try design and you clash it with design and clash it with development, right? And so it's like, whatever, I'll put a line on and they're like, hey, check this out, I can make it fly across the screen and fling up the logo or something, right? And maybe that's a step towards positivity or a positive dialogue between teams, because doing creative things together is fun, really.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like using Sketch and like Adobe XD, and like I definitely have like the more design background, like we mostly have collectively, but like the front end development stuff definitely interests me. Working on my skills to get towards that, but I love playing around with Sketch and like Adobe XD.
Yeah, like some of the positive points that I have here for being a designer is that we basically have endless possibilities, right? Like we aren't restricted by what we can do with code. We can go into, our Sketch or Adobe XD and create whatever it is that we have in our heads or what we envision. And it's also front facing. So everybody gets to see that cool thing that we made. Whereas a developer, it's all behind the scenes. Whereas unless you're like a super nerd like Kirk and get it and understand what's going on back there, it's completely overlooked. And that technical expertise isn't really thought about.
Do I have to protect myself? Being a nerd? I don't know. I think,
Term of endearment. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
No, and it's fair, and I'm taking it exactly the right way. Promise. I'm proud of it. But I think you're all destined to become nerds. How about that? I think once you get that role, especially Kaitlyn, I know you're working on a lot of websites, and I know you're working on a team with a developer, and I think through mistakes or through successes, you're absolutely going to be strong on both sides real soon. I honestly, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't know. I wish that for you to become a nerd like me, I guess.
Thank you. Right now, I'm just a minor nerd. I would consider myself a front-end developer. Like I'm comfortable with HTML and CSS, not necessarily JavaScript, but those are the only ones that I would dabble in.
Okay, so I think you're 40% nerd. Is that a good gauge? Because knowing that stuff is powerful. It really is. You'd be surprised how many designers that I might have on my end of the team or my side of the team that have no clue how to run CSS or wouldn't even begin to dream touching JavaScript, for instance. So yeah, you're on your way. Sorry to let you know.
Yeah, it kind of brings me back in a sense to the class we just did for Info 4679 with Glenn when we were reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Again, with the romantic and the classical perspective. So a romantic thinker is fueled by inspiration, intuition, creativity, and imagination. They're more on the appearance and the aesthetics. Whereas in contrast, classical perspective sees the world as primarily underlying form itself. They think straightforward. Everything's carefully proportioned. They value systems, laws, and logic. But the truth is, when it comes down to it, and I think that's why we're so important as information designers, as well as we need both science and art and logic and intuition. We need everything together. And so understanding the back-end developer and the designer and understanding both kind of forms will bring everything together. And that's why there needs to be that cohesiveness between the both realms, in my opinion, to kind of bring out any good project.
In the next developer designer meeting, Shadi, I'll make sure I leave it up to you to tell the developer they're not romantic or romantic thinking.
Thank you. I will. I'll bring up another whole spiel about the book.
That is a good metaphor, though. It's a great metaphor.
It's just a metaphor, but we're having fun.
I think what Shadi said was really good because it ties up all the different barriers that we kind of discuss, where for the designer, complexity might be overlooked, and for the development, the back-end work is not always as easy as we think it is. It's a little bit more complex. There is a bit more limitations than we think it is. But if the person's a whiz, well, you're lucky.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Shadi said. Like, the deep divide sort of between designers and developers sort of lies in the approaches they take towards solving problems. And yeah, I guess sort of to merge this this divide and being more competent in all areas is to sort of take the opposing mindsets and yeah, sort of use them not just in the aspect of like being able to use different tools and programs, but in like the actual construction of the front and back end. So yeah, I think that analogy is really important.
Yeah, and if you are unsure where you want to be, you can always try out both areas. This will give you experience and skills. And thankfully, in our program, we do get to experience a little bit of front-end development through our information architecture course, where we designed and developed our own websites from scratch. I remember this being a bit of a headache at first, but such a good learning experience. And there are also electives that you can take within the computer science field if you want to take a much deeper dive into expanding development skills.
Maybe just to expand a little bit on that, you learn one computer language, you, I guess, learn the logic to at least be able to perform on all the others, for sure. I mean, that's what they say. I've worked with a few little languages, and I somewhat have experienced that. You know, sometimes you just gotta learn the different way it does it in a different language or whatever. But yeah, I think the logic is all the same.
All right, it looks like we are out of time for today, but thank you all for participating, and thank you all at home for tuning in today. We hope you've enjoyed and learned about how to become the best designer you can be. Today we talked about romantic versus classical thinking, how the communication between the designer and the developer is key in production, and of course the future of jobs in web development and beyond. We encourage you to join us next week and apply these topics in your profession, of course, by any means necessary. Thank you.